The Oregon Trail was a powerful migration of people, money, and ideas to the western lands of America as a social and economic reaction to poverty, boredom, and the need for monetary stimulation in the East. The 2,000-mile trek across a variety of terrain led to western expansion, new resources, unprecedented freedoms, and economic gain for anybody who sought it out. By the year 1900, the West was a prominent landmark both economically and politically, which allowed for new information, beliefs, and ideas. During the early 1800s, the economic boom created by the British colonization of the Americas began to die down for the people with no means to obtain lands. Large landowners dominated the wealth, religion, and politics of a region, which left a large area for poverty, religious intoleration, and little political assistance. With nowhere to turn, families began to look for new options to ensure their safety and economic security. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread in the backwoods of many states centered around a land of great opportunity and beauty to the west. These rumors began as groups of people who had traveled into the western territories out of curiosity began to return with stories of plentiful resources, easy money, and vast amounts of land. The first travelers who made their way west officially were a small group comprised of fur traders and fishermen. Their hope was to find and create a flourishing fur trade in the western frontier, which they did successfully. For those still in the East, the act of simply seeing other people make their way west and having success was enough to push them to go. By 1840, it was not uncommon to see men simply pick up their families, place them in a wagon, and start off on the Oregon Trail. As more people started their trek in response to their family and friends leaving for the west, a complex network began along the Oregon Trail. The average traveler would start out in Independence, a small city located near the Missouri River, and end in or around Oregon City 2,000 miles away. It served as the unofficial beginning of the trail, which meant large amounts of people made their way into it every day. Realizing this, many people began businesses here, selling clothing, livestock, and other gear for the trip. This was a very good choice for many people because on average, a wagon party would spend their entire life savings on gear. This money would go into the basics required to make the long trip. In the realm of food, an adult would consume 120 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of cornmeal, 40 pounds of sugar, and much more over the course of the trip. A wagon was also required, the most common being a prairie schooner known for its agility and large storage capacity. Women brought along pots and pans, cooking utensils, and a few other items to assist them in cooking, as well as a few things to help them sew, make clothing, and take care of the family's health. Water was also required, and barrels of fresh water were available for purchase in the local town. Finally, a fully loaded wagon would need something to pull, so mules or horses were commonly purchased. However, the most common were oxen, as they were the most highly demanded. With their wagons, one would most likely try to find a guide to assist them on their journey, and this guide would gather a large group of wagons to create a wagon train. These guides would be paid in food, shelter, and the little money that families had left to bring the trains west. As soon as everybody was ready, the wagon train would start off on their long journey.
That's what you think, that we're lost?
I'd say that seems about the right word for it.
We're not lost, we're just finding our way.
I don't blame him for not knowing. I blame him for saying he did.
We made our decision. This is gonna be a bad dream soon. It's gonna be a story to tell.
Till thou return unto the ground. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever.
One amazing thing about the Oregon Trail is that anyone from any walk of life could make the trip and did. At first, the trail was very easy to travel as many people had cleared out the path before and made it very easy to walk. However, before long, the terrain took hold and made it very difficult to travel. The weight of the wagons took its toll on the animals pulling them, and people were forced to throw their possessions out the back of wagons, keeping only the necessities. The trail was a very difficult place, filled with Native American attacks, dehydration, starvation, disease, theft, murder, and more. Apart from the rough landscape and unforgivable conditions on the trail, women faced an even greater ordeal. Great amounts of physical stress along with increasing emotional tension brought even the strongest women to their wits' end. Their morning routine consisted of awakening to a dark morning and cooking for the entire family. As days passed by, food either ran empty or grew infested with maggots. Nevertheless, women slaved over campfires, providing whatever they could for their hungry spouses or children. Besides cooking, the chore of washing clothes forced women to carry heavy buckets of water around camp and dry the soaked apparel before they set out. On top of it all, complaining was not an option. Women had to show complete patience and respect for their spouses, donning full-length dresses that limited movement to simple walking. In a recent interview, Laura Woodworth-Ney was asked the question, "What is the role that women played on the Oregon Trail?" To this she responded, "Women are really taking their domestic role from the household that was established in their stationary home on the trail. They are responsible for taking care of children, they are responsible for cooking, they are responsible for gathering wood, for gathering water. Men generally, once the campsite is set up, will try to hunt or plan the next day's activities, tend to the horses, do the heavy labor. Women often will help the children gather what food they could. They gathered wood, they boiled water, and they did a lot of physical labor as well in maintaining the campsite, and then of course, women are giving birth on the trail." Woodworth was then asked how hard a trip was on a woman, on a child, and everybody else in the group, to which she responded, "It's a very difficult trip, but it varied a lot. Some families had an easier experience than others. It really depended on the time of year, it depended on the year. Some of the mid-40 years, 1840s years, were probably easier because there are fewer people on the trail. There is a more friendly relationship, perhaps, with the native people on the trail, and then the trail has been established enough that there are guides along the way. Travelers are communicating with each other by creating signs, writing in pencil on bleached bones, for example, pointing out where water is unsafe to drink, or pointing out shortcuts. And so by the mid-1840s, some of these trail travelers experienced an easier time. For women, the combination of taking care of children, losing children on the trail is perhaps the most difficult aspect of it, and having to leave that child behind, buried behind along the trail. Meanwhile, a man's job was that of responsibility. He would trade, assess danger levels, hunt wild animals such as buffalo, and fish for food to put on the table. In a sense, the man took over the role of the president of his wagon, making the laws. He did this by controlling how far the wagon would go each day, how much food everybody could eat, how much water everybody could drink, and how long the animals would be able to travel each day. This concept is interesting, however, considering that the woman was the one who did the most work. Nonetheless, the trail was tiresome for all people who traveled it. For those who had the willpower to travel the entire length of the trail, their efforts were greatly rewarded. The trail spanned over 2,000 miles in some of the harshest terrain seen during this time period. But it was worth it. Oregon opened doors. There was a plentiful amount of resources, so families could move into log cabins instead of their wagons immediately. There were no boundaries on the number of jobs in the fishing, timber, fur trading, banking, and construction industries, not to mention the thousands of jobs and industries yet to be created in the new land. What this meant was there was no boundary on the type of living a person wanted. While all this travel transpired, America had bigger plans. In order for the eastern and the western states to connect, the first transcontinental railroad was established after decades of construction. The railroad rendered traveling by wagon useless, since train rides only took 7 days and cost around $65. In independence, the economy took a major hit. Less preparation was necessary for the journey, and families could save money for when they actually reached their destination. Although profitable for the train companies and travelers, natives lost their land and store owners lost their customer base. Another amazing aspect about the railroad system is how it affected many of the people who had settled on the West. Resources could easily make their way in either direction at this point, so those who had jobs in the prospering industries such as the timber industry could easily make a profit. Although there was an increase in profit of many resources, Jim Wilk tells us that the railroad made the Oregon Trail virtually useless and can almost clearly define the end of the wagon age. Although the use of the Oregon Trail may have decreased, the impact can still be seen today. The West became a prominent landmark both economically and politically. Not to mention the West created thousands of jobs for all different types of people who were then able to feed their families. Its impact on the railroad industry and its technology also had an enormous impact on the transportation industry and communication industry. Overall, it can be said that the Oregon Trail was the greatest migratory reaction to date, and its occurrence has lasting impacts today.